welcome to Can I Just Say from Common Room Radio. I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. And we are talking this week about Howard's End, the book.
The E.M. Forster novel.
Yes, the E.M. Forster novel. And we will be covering also the limited series that will be coming to Starz in April. It was already on the BBC.
Oh, Haley Atwell. I will watch anything she does.
Yes, we're very excited about it. So we decided to do, like we have done with other things, to start with the book and then move on to adaptation.
I love this whole idea. I should say this was going to be a spin-off podcast called Great Adaptations, which I still think is super clever and cute. But now it's just a thing that we'll do from time to time.
Yes, we'll call the series Great Adaptations.
Oh, good. I love that. Thank you, darling.
And I think we're going to be doing a whole lot of it. So at some level,
oh, good.
Can I Just Say is going to be kind of be great adaptations for a while, because we're both really enjoying this and we have like a whole list of books that we're excited about doing. So,
So tell me about your introduction to this book, to Howard's End.
Okay, so it started with A Room with a View.
Of course,
which I looked up, came out when I was 16. I thought I was older. 16, I saw that. So now it makes complete sense to me that I saw A Room with a View and was just bowled over with the beauty and the romanticism and all of that. Yes. And I don't know where that lies. I mean, I think that probably was both my introduction to E.M. Forster and also to Merchant Ivory. Like then I just became...
Talk to me about Merchant Ivory, why that has its tag, and I keep hearing it lately. And
oh goodness, and I don't remember their first names right now. One of them is Ismail, and the other one, oh shoot! And I just said it last week. I was so excited. Okay, so I believe that there are a couple. I don't think I knew that at the time. That there are these two men who basically wrote and produced all of these beautiful period films, and I should have the list in front of me.
That's wonderful.
And I don't. And and they're like all your aesthetic. We should maybe watch the film and talk about that too.
Absolutely.
I did rewatch the film because I was trying to remember how much, how I felt about it, and I do. I'm not going to talk about that because you haven't seen it. But the one thing I'll say is this book is very much about the internal thought processes of, even though it's in third person, it's very much about the internal thought.
Fascinating.
Right. It's really interesting how he did that.
Yeah.
And
I don't always like it. It's sometimes hard to read. Sometimes I feel a little like there's too much going on. It's like everybody has caption bubbles above their heads all the time, and it feels like a lot sometimes. It's beautiful,
kind of.
But it does feel. E.M. Forster, I think, is very abrupt and
interesting.
It feels like the very dramatic and not funny version of a sex farce. Like everyone's always slamming through a door who you don't expect and then slamming the door again and then coming in and coming out and no one's who you expect it's going to be. And the line always surprises you. So in that way, I found the book sometimes challenging to read.
Interesting.
But lovely. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, I like when the book is personal, and sometimes it veers very much into the, like, I'm going to tell you about philosophy and politics and stuff. And that's when I enjoy it less. Like, I feel like the weird thing about it is that he did that so well through the characters themselves. So I feel like when the narrator steps back a step, like, I feel like, you're kind of closing in on the characters and their thoughts and then stepping back a little. The stepping back for me felt like he was he just had stuff he really wanted to make sure we got. And I feel like he was doing that just fine with the characters and the story. And so every time he steps back, for the most part, it felt to me like, okay, now you're just telling me what you already expressed through your character interactions.
Yeah, it did feel sometimes incongruous, just because, like, sometimes I felt like I was reading a novel, and reading fiction,
right? And
sometimes I was reminded of reading Civil Disobedience, and I like both of those things, so it didn't bother me. But I did find myself wanting something that had a little more continuity again, because sometimes the author voice coming in that narrative voice did sort of surprise me. but I always liked it, I think. And that's when I think the most beautiful prose was. And, I'm such a sucker for prose.
No, I totally agree with you on that. That's true. Yes, that's absolutely true. And yeah, I just feel like I sometimes wished that he took all of that and put it into the story and not these stepping back moments.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed, I think, that the dialogue was harder to follow and had less of the prose than I would have liked, which made it more realistic. But because it's, from 1910, it just feels a little bit antiquated. So there's so many little jokes that I don't get, and little sayings that don't mean anything to me, and Britishisms that I don't quite follow. So that part was harder. And so when he did step back and give the narrative voice, I was able to follow the thought sometimes better than when just it was Henry Wilcox talking about savings and loans and banks and and the things that are just over my head and out of my wheelhouse anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. So back to my story. I saw Room with View, and then I don't think I read any of the books, and I didn't look up when this film came out. But
92, I believe.
92. Okay,
I think that's right. I just read it a moment ago.
So that's what happened was that in 85, I was mesmerized by Room with a View, the film. And then when I was in college, I read all of his books.
Wow.
And then I guess I saw this film.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite of his books?
That's a really good question now. I mean, because I read them all, that was a really long time ago. Mm. I think if you had asked me before we started reading this book, I would have said this one, but I'm not sure. I mean, it was so long ago, and I was such a different person. So it's in this book, I honestly remembered it very differently. It was kind of like, with Jane Eyre, is that I had seen the movie so many times that I had completely had transformed my view of the book through the experience of the movie.
Yes,
movie is very true to the book, but again, there's just the interiority is very hard to express.
You even attempt. There's so much interiority,
you can't. Right? And you get the story.
Yeah. I love that E.M. Forster, I think, is as he's talking about, as we see these different perspectives and these different points of view, and as people have real arguments about philosophy and about social classes and about what's a better word, like philanthropy, I suppose, as they have these really important discussions. I don't feel like he really shows his hand.
He doesn't.
To where he falls, which is beautiful. That's so gorgeous and so. It takes such a delicate hand, I think.
Yep.
It's really, really beautifully done. And I feel that even though there are people, I like right in the beginning, we talk about Helen saying that she kind of liked being told the opposite of what she believed and just taking a moment to kind of sit in that. And I felt the same way in the book, like the way that the characters expressed themselves and their beliefs was so forthright, and so like they had so much conviction that I could just appreciate their point of view and their perspective. It never felt too terribly. It was like the opposite of somebody's Facebook rant, It was just really beautifully done.
They were all, well, I would say, Meg. I mean, you're really you're mostly in Margaret's POV. Mostly. Like you do spend a little time in Leonard's, but it really is for the most part Margaret and a little bit of Leonard. So I think that, Margaret is that person. Like she's the middle ground person. Like other people have stronger opinions than she does, and she changes. I mean, I think that's a huge part of the book is that she changes and learns, and I don't even know if changes back. Like, I think it's that she changes and then finds her own way by the end.
Right.
So I think you're doing that along with her. But what's interesting is, except for Charles, who's like our bad guy. I mean, I just like, he's our bad guy.
He's pretty unlikable.
Right. He's pretty unlikable. And so you can kind of see him as an offshoot or a more extreme version of Henry. But Henry, he makes good points. Like, I mostly don't like his points, but he, but it's exactly like, it's exactly like talking to older men in your family where you're like, no,
Precisely.
but.
I was like, this is my dad.
Right.
Whoa.
Right. And it's just like,
Yes.
but he's not stupid, and
No.
he's coming from the perspective he's coming from. And so, let's talk about that. I really would like to start where the book starts, which
Beautiful.
is the first line of the book is, one may as well begin with Helen's letter to her sister. And I love that. I mean, it's a very, like, we're very made aware in the first sentence that there is a narrator who's
Yes.
making choices about how they're telling us this story. But I also this is more than anything the story of these two sisters.
Yeah. And it's a charming letter.
It is a charming letter. I did not quote. I don't have the letter here to quote,
Oh.
but I just
Well, I have the whole book right next to me, so you just let me know.
No, it's not that. I really wanted to talk about how we see these two sisters, and I feel like, there are so many relationships in this story, but I feel like the main thread of this story is their closeness, and then their estrangement, and then how they find each other again.
Yes.
So I wanted to see, like, what do you think of their relationship? How do you see them in relation to each other?
They definitely have the classic big sister and little sister. You see very quickly how protective Margaret is of Helen, which I always like. And something we see a lot too, I think, with younger sisters is this idea that they get to be a little more flighty and a little more emotional because someone else is looking after the bigger picture of things, because they do have that sort of protector, especially when the parental units are gone, as they are in this story.
Right.
I like very much how Meg wants to go to Helen immediately. Like, no matter how far away she is, she wants to be physically in her presence. And I like how we hear later on in the book that they have a particular language. Like, this is not how she and I talk. Like, we have a particular way of doing things, and a real intimacy that, when that is, I guess, breached, when that distance comes between them, you can feel why Margaret thinks it can only be madness or illness that has driven them apart.
Right. Yeah, I love that each character kind of has their terminology, and I love that over and over again they go back to this idea of that they're not just their common language, but like that their worldview is based in affection, and so that's the word that's always used over and over again is affection.
Oh, I didn't pick up on affection as much. I picked up very much on the word connect and connection. Is that the same? Would you say?
I think for them that is the same. I think that is that their worldview, the way that they experience the world, the way they judge the world, the way they make choices, even when they are at odds with each other, is based in an emotional truth.
Yes, certainly.
And so I think that's what, I feel like maybe I was going to hold this for later, but maybe we can get into like archetypes and how I see like the different groups of people representing different parts of humanity.
Okay. Jump right into that. Sure.
Okay.
I'm here for the ride.
So, I wanted to get into the ins and outs of that, and I have quotes for all of these things because I love it. But
beautiful.
I feel like it's so interesting because you can take each group of people and talk about them on many ways. Like, so we have, I think the more obvious way to talk about each group of people is by class, right? So the Wilcoxes represent kind of the old money, the
aristocracy.
Right, exactly. And the Schlegels represent, the intelligentsia. Like they're like the people who think and theorize and all of that. And then the Basts are the working class.
Yes.
And then there's the whole question of like, should people actually be moving from one group to another? And that's a big philosophical question because Leonard Bast wants very much to be Schlegel-like.
Yes.
Like that's his big dream. So that's one way to look at them. And I do want to have that conversation. And this book is saying all sorts of things about that. There's also the groups are separated by old and new, which is not necessarily related to class, but like that. Like
old and new money, or old and new...
Old and new
what do you mean?
Culture.
Oh, like modern when you say
Right.
new.
Exactly.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So that's another way. But the thing that's most interesting to me, which will be a surprise, no surprise to you or anyone else who's ever heard me talk about anything, is kind of where they fit in like a larger view of the world, a more archetypal view of the world, which is
this Daphne's Philosophy Hour? Because I love that
yeah,
part.
I know. We're totally doing that for a minute.
We
don't have to stay there the whole time.
No, I love it. I really do. It's not something that I'm educated in, so I really do love this. Please do.
I don't know if I am educated in it either. I just tend towards this. I can't help myself.
Yeah. Well, you grew
It's
up.
what I see.
Yeah.
It's what I see.
Okay.
So the first description we have of Ruth Wilcox, of the first Mrs. Wilcox, is that Helen says, "Then she walked off the lawn to the meadow, whose corner to the right I could just see. Trail, trail went her long dress over the sopping grass, and she came back with her hands full of the hay that was cut yesterday, I suppose for rabbits or something, as she kept on smelling it." And the next, there's another description of her of like about how her dress has gotten all dirty from being in the wet grass. And, I guess this was that. Oh, no, this wasn't that. There was another one. And there's talk of ancestors, and she talks about the land. Like, so for me, Ruth Wilcox, right. Ruth Wilcox is the land. She is the land of England. She is the earth. She is nature.
Okay. Interesting. All right. I like that.
Henry Wilcox is animal nature. Like, he talks all the time. I mean, it's funny because he talks about him. It's a very typical economic argument about survival of the fittest, but he constantly is using animal language. He's talking about wolves. He's talking about dogs. He's talking about
bears,
about survival.
I remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's a more kind of animalistic side of whatever, humanity, mythology, however we want to look at it. And then I see Tibby as like the mind, like really just the mind, like the detached mind. Like he has no connection to anything. It's so funny that his two sisters are so emotion based, and he's just like off. He doesn't really want to interact with people. He kind of likes his sisters, but not really anyone else. Even they are a bit of a trouble to him. And then the sisters for me are emotion. Like they are almost like the most human thing. Like they are completely based in humanism and also in humanity.
Yes, which brings me back to what you were saying about affection and connection. And I was thinking about that difference between affection and humanism and philanthropy and charity. Which I think there's a lot that this book has to say about it. Like they are wanting so much to have this real and personal connection and affection specifically with Leonard Bast. Right. But also I think I like seeing that kind of back and forth with Miss Avery.
Yes.
Right?
So Miss Avery is amazing to me. And I highlighted almost all of her things she said. I love
She's fabulous.
So yeah, for me, I see Miss Avery as almost like if we're going to like go full on mythology here, like if Ruth Wilcox is like basically like an earth goddess,
right?
Miss Avery is basically like almost like a priestess of her. Like Miss Avery is the one who lives in that reality, and that's why she seems so detached when she's talking to Margaret, and she's like, "But you already live here," and she keeps calling her Mrs. Wilcox because it's almost like the goddess died and then the goddess was replaced,
was reincarnated or something.
Right?
Sure. This very like Hestia. Yes,
exactly.
Okay. Well, I love that. As I'm sure you knew I would.
Right. So Miss Avery is just like exists in that plane almost. Like she's not 100%, and they all talk about how she's kind of batty. And the Wilcoxes, of course, associate that with being an old maid because in their view of the world, they can only, like, they're just such materialists. They cannot see any spiritualism, which is fascinating that their mother, if in this world their mother is kind of the earth goddess, the idea that they so refused to be part of that, but so did her husband. Like that, she was she was existing again almost on her own plane and not really in the same reality. And that's why she says like she can't really participate in the conversations. Like that's what it felt like to me.
When they were all
I mean, there's
together.
a whole gender.
That's
there's a
so
whole gender analysis of that we should do as well.
Yes.
Absolutely, let's get there. But for me, like if you're looking at this just in an archetypal sense, it's almost like Ruth Wilcox was part of Howard Zinn and part of the Earth, and her family sprung from her, but they really are in a way of her husband's world.
Yes,
a materialist world.
I like that very much.
And that ties in then to Margaret when she's talking about, I mean, another conversation. There's so many conversations we need to have. But the whole conversation, the whole thing about Margaret trying to change Henry, like that whole thing that she does that women need to not do is like, I'll marry a man and change him to be the man I want him to be.
Oh, God. Yes.
But she kind of does it. So I'm a little annoyed with the book because it's like, don't do that thing, women. Don't do that thing.
Right.
Don't marry.
Well, and don't forget that the book was written by a man. And that's that whole sort of, what we were talking about the other day, like the Madonna whore thing, where it's like this lovely, loving, compassionate, humanist influence, this feminine virtue comes into your life and can turn you around and bring you out of what they say, out of the gray and add color and bring you out of the mist.
Yes.
Or
this book is
you're
definitely
just
buying
be an
into that
forever.
Yeah.
Right.
No, the book is definitely, and it's seeing it from the woman's perspective, but she definitely believes that. But what's interesting in that, wait, where was I going to go with the interesting in that?
What's not horrifying about that?
What's not horrifying about that is the language in relation to the philosophy, and then we can get into the gender stuff.
Okay.
Is that she was talking about like Margaret exactly wants to cure Henry of that, like her whole discussion of trying to bring poetry to the prose of his way of looking at the world. So that is her tying into that. But yeah. Oh yeah, we're like it is perilous to go down this philosophical road I've just gone down because it is so easy to like just stumble and end up into some sort of, gender absolutism that I don't want to go into.
Sure.
I'm just pointing out like let's talk about it in more elemental terms and then let's talk about the gender reality of what's actually happening in the book. Because that's a different question.
It is.
And I feel like the book is very conflicted. Like the book is very much wants to the book is questioning the kind of legalistic side of women's rights very much so. Because of the whole thing about, Henry, can you forgive my sister for what you've already been forgiven for? Like, this is no different. And if it is different, the difference is that you could walk away and she cannot. She might even die. So I love that. Thank you, E.M. Forster, for, bringing up that thing. But yes, I do think there is an aspect of gender absolutism going on here, that women are such and men are such, and yeah, women can either be like, we have our exceptional women, the Schlegels, and then we have our kind of ditzy women,
the Jackies and the parlor maids, and and
Charles's wife, what is her name?
Oh yes, Dolly.
Thank you, Miss Baby Talk, and I can't think about yeah, exactly.
It's very bad. Yes.
Which is not to say there aren't people like that. They can be of either gender.
That is true.
I mean, on some level,
Tibby is kind of a
that's
ditzy character in some ways, I felt.
Well, he's a type that I'm very familiar with, like someone who's just lives so much on an intellectual plane that he is incapable. He's kind of, the absent-minded professor.
Bits. Yes.
He's the absent-minded professor style. Yes.
Yes.
Like he's so good, and it's like, I love how the characters are drawn when they go to the concert, when they go see the Beethoven. And
gorgeous. Yeah.
And, right?
Done. Yes.
So it's like Meg is loving the music. Tibby's like analyzing the music. He's just like, I know this and I know this and I know that. He's like, it's like they talk about in fandom, like the women who like will just like be swept away by a television show or a movie, and the men who are like, I will collect every fact about this and know all the facts and know the facts better than you. And then you have Helen, who's just like making up stories, and she's like, this is goblins and this is the hero, and just like having this whole interior story going on that's inspired by the music.
Yeah.
And then their aunt,
that was glorious.
Right. Then their aunt, who's just kind of like, she's just like, I'm trying really hard to be smart like my nieces and nephew.
Yes. I loved when we got a little bit of Leonard's interiority there when he had gone back and it was talking about how he wanted beauty in his life.
Yes.
But there was only so much available to him because he does not have money.
Yep.
And that is still true today. Like theater tickets and concert tickets and the Philharmonic and the ballet are still just out of most people's reach.
Well, and time. Like, that's the other thing is he's like, I want, he would name authors, but they, of course, had read all of those authors because they have time
and leisure
to do nothing right. They have time to do nothing but sit and peruse and read and discuss and have discussion groups about him. And
oh God, yes.
I know. Mm-hmm. But I mean, and that's a big difference is that it's very complicated what's going on there with the discussion of class. I really feel like it makes me, there are moments where I'm like, yeah, book. And then there's moments where like, oh, book, I'm so uncomfortable with you.
It makes you uncomfortable. Yeah.
And I think that's good, actually. I mean,
it is. And I think it's done purposefully. And I love that I believe it's made very clear that for all of their talking, these people have no idea what it is like to be poor. Right. Just no idea.
They have no more idea than Henry Wilcox. Like he's, and he does. He says the thing that definitely my grandpa had said to me, was like, who are you to decide that he isn't having a successful life?
Right. Or that he isn't happy or that his world is gray. In some ways, it's a very good point. In some way, there's a very respectful and humanistic perspective on that. And in other ways, but the guy can't make his rent and you have three houses.
Right.
One in the city and two in the country.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is that Henry has a point, but he also doesn't give a shit. And he's also
I think the difference between
of
the
the
philanthropy
class
and the affection, yes, for the fellow man and the humanism.
He is actively part of the class that has created this system in which a Leonard Bast cannot succeed. Mm. But on the flip side, I mean, I feel like this is a beautiful, terrifying criticism of uninformed liberalism. This idea that we can save people because, I mean, it's so condescending the way they want to help Leonard.
Yes. And this is the thing that, again, my very libertarian father, who's very much like Henry, would say is that a lot of liberal thinking for charity in particular thinks of people as their pets. And I do not like that. I'm like, that's a really good point, though. It's very interesting. It makes you really think about how you view people and their inherent value. I think they're like their inherent values is the best I can come up with. As
I know, but but there is the subtext here when we don't get to see anyone do that because again, this is a gendered thing. Also, the women don't actually have the power to make systemic change.
Yes,
and so that's where Leonard comes in, where he's like, "Look, I don't want charity. I want a job."
Right. Yes, and
so,
to be paid for the work that I do and a livable wage.
Exactly. So that's the thing that we don't get to see because we don't have that character in this story. We don't have the character who's actually calling for or able to enact in any way systemic. I mean, the person who could enact systemic change is Henry, but he's not going to do it.
But he's not going to. Yeah.
Right. No, of course he's not going to. No, I mean, Henry's end game, like his kind of happy place or happier place that he ends at the end is all about himself. It's not about class. It's more about that thing about Meg, about the like poetry and prose and like finding that place in himself.
Well, and he does want to provide for his children, noticing. That's right.
I love that she over and over again uses that word noticing in relationship, that that she's been trying to teach him things and he doesn't notice them. And at the end, she says he's so tired because when a person finally notices, it wears them out.
And isn't that the truth? I feel like a lot of America is in that spot this last year or two.
It's very true.
It's like, I'm tired now. I get it.
Yes,
and it sucks. And now I need a nap and a beer.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, I mean, and that in itself, the fact that that we do have this, I mean, a really very harsh criticism of our sisters. I mean, Leonard Bast dies. Like this is like this is no joke. It's like they basically help him to his grave, to ruin and then his grave.
They absolutely ruin him. Yes.
And that in itself, in a way, is a gender discussion, because really the only tools these women had, they don't have the vote. They're talking. Right. They talk about that. They don't have the vote.
Right.
The only power they have is to do charity because they are themselves wealthy, or
and to influence men.
Right. Exactly. Those are the only two powers they have. So that in itself it's very complex. So it's like we're censoring them for what they did, but we also have to recognize that they didn't actually live in a reality where there was anything else they could do other than just ignore it. They could have ignored class, or they could have their little discussion groups and do charity and try to influence a husband like Henry.
But again, they
could
have not treated Leonard as a pet project.
Absolutely.
They could have listened to him and asked him, why not have that conversation? Now, that's a very difficult conversation to have, but they could have gotten to the point where they say, what can we do for the lower classes? What is actually helpful?
The not meddling. I mean, the like telling him to leave his job, definitely not helpful.
Right.
I mean, it was so flippant. Like, Helen's so busy blaming Henry for that, but she, like, based on one person's word, she told a guy to leave his job.
Yeah. And then
again, Leonard chose to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard also chose to do it, but he, there's just not an easy answer here. There's just not.
No, it's a clustercuss for sure. No, it gets all messed up. What do they call it? A tangle? It's a tangle. Yes. Well, and even when Helen and Leonard have their night together, she talks about it being, again, something that seems quite impersonal, like a loneliness that they both could sort of reach, but was not really about one another. She doesn't love him. She says that. She's like, she feels bad about not being in love with him and missing him in that sense. But that's not ever what she was doing. Like, for all her talk about seeing these people in connection. It's true.
Nor was he. He was idealizing her. He was not knowing her.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's very important not to fall into that trap as well of blaming her for it simply because she was the more wealthy party. Like, they weren't connecting.
They weren't connecting, and they did both at least feel badly about it after the fact. Like, she tried to everything that she could do to fix it, and she felt real guilt and remorse, which is a thing that Henry never felt about Jackie. He felt embarrassment and humiliation, but not remorse.
Well, he felt embarrassment because he got caught.
Because he got caught. Well, exactly so.
Not because he actually saw anything wrong with the behavior. The problem was the fact that he got caught, because he didn't see it as an insult to Ruth at all, because Ruth never found out.
Exactly so.
Or at least he thought Ruth never found out. I mean, come on.
I'm sure she knew. She was a very wise woman.
Well, she knew. I mean, that's what we learned immediately. I mean, I just feel like
she knew about Paul and Helen, right?
She knew about Paul and Helen. She knew about everything, and she's just. Can we go back to Ruth for a little bit, because I could really talk about Ruth forever.
Yes, Ruth is fantastic. By all means, go back to Ruth.
I love Ruth, and I really want to talk about Ruth and Margaret. I found their relationship fascinating. But I find Ruth fascinating because, yes, she knew about Helen and Paul. And despite her claim when she went to tea with Margaret and Margaret's very smart, very talkative friends, of not understanding stuff, she understood so much. Like, even when Margaret sent her that quite insulting letter, she could see past that. Like, she really, she might be the person, the only person. I'm going to say she might be the only person who has true empathy in this story. Like, I think Margaret has some empathy, but she still seems to always be playing out her own theoretical constructs about people more so than having empathy for them until the end. I mean, I think that's when she regains or learns the empathy, which is interesting because that happens at Howard's End. But Ruth has that from the beginning, and I particularly love the moment where she completely surprises Margaret, like when they're doing the Christmas shopping, and she's like, "Come to Howard's End now."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That this spontaneity, like, this is just not what you would expect from this woman. Like, even though our introduction to her is so earthy, we still have all these preconceived notions about what a woman like that would be. Mm-hmm. And just like Margaret refuses because of propriety or some sense of propriety, like, it was possibly the most earnest moment in the whole book. I felt like that Ruth wanted to make a real connection.
Yes.
And that she actually even referred back. What's the quote? Right after they talked about the letter, they had met in Germany. Where had they met? They met when they were traveling. That's how this all started. Right.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said to Margaret, "I wonder whether you ever think about yourself." And then Margaret says, "I think of nothing else," said Margaret, blushing, but letting her hand remain in that of the invalid. And then Ruth says again, "I wonder." And it's almost like they met for this short time, but Ruth saw straight through to who Margaret really is.
Yes. Well, and I think that I got at least a little bit from Ruth that there was a very purposeful pushing back against all these new thoughts and ideas that these young women were having, because she had missed that. Like, like, had she been younger, she would have been thrilled to be at that table. I got that.
Oh, interesting.
That sense. But it was too much change now. I think that she couldn't have lived the life that she was in, especially knowing that she was ill. I think she couldn't see that much potential and just not be intimidated by it enough to just step back and say, "Well, I leave this thinking to someone else."
I have such a different view of it. That's so interesting. Really? Yeah, I really do. In my eyes, Ruth has an essential truth because of her empathy, because of her connection with the earth. And she wants to connect with Margaret. Like, she wants to have understood that conversation at that tea because she feels a connection to Margaret. Mm-hmm. But I think on some level, this is showing us that what Margaret is engaged with, because it's in the city, and the city is artifice, and the city is a world where things are torn down and built all the time, that really, to some extent, all of these intellectual conversations they're having are also just artifice, that they're not real, that they're not essential. And that what Margaret needs to learn is how to integrate her intellectual self with the earth. And that's what happens when she goes to Howard's End.
That's
that she actually reconnects or connects with, like, she constantly is romanticizing, like the same way that Leonard romanticizes the Schlegels. Margaret is constantly romanticizing the idea of leaving the city. Like, I have a quote about her with the train stations.
It's true. She really dislikes London.
Yes. I mean, she loves it on some level. Like, when Ruth says, like, "I wake up early when," right, exactly. So on some level, she loves it, but I don't know if her heart's really in that. I think that Forster is at the same time presenting intellectualism as something worthy, but also saying don't go too far. Like don't get so caught up in the beehive of all of these thoughts without remembering what it's actually about. That you can get caught up with your theories and your ideas and your charities, but never actually be doing it for anything. Like it just can become like an echo chamber. And I think that's part of what's happening with Margaret in Ruth, that it's exposing that Margaret's world is an echo chamber.
Well, it's what's happening with Helen and Leonard, because Leonard goes out for that walk. Exactly.
I mean, there is absolutely, the book definitely is in favor of connection with the earth. When they're like, wasn't the dawn so beautiful? And he's like, no, not actually. And they love that because they're like, wait, that's real. But they're romanticizing the real the same way he's romanticizing their intellectual world.
That's so interesting. I think of all those times that Margaret's looking out the window, like looking at the Six Hills or looking at that particular tree.
She longs for it. She longs for a connection with the earth. And I think that's what is so interesting to her about Ruth. That's why she connects with Ruth. I love when she asks
Henry about that tree with the teeth in it, and he has no idea what she's talking about.
Of course.
And it had captured her so much.
Because he's completely detached from the earth.
That's fascinating. Can I read my little section here? I have a little section here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, talks about the mythology of England. Why has not England a great mythology? Our folklore has never advanced beyond daintiness, and the greater melodies about our countryside have all issued through the pipes of Greece. Deep and true as the native imagination can be, it seems to have failed here. It has stopped with the witches and the fairies. It cannot vivify one fraction of a summer field, or give names to 6 stars. England still waits for the supreme moment of her literature, for the great poet who shall voice her. Or, better still, for the 1,000 little poets whose voices shall pass into our common talk. We get that when Margaret is walking through and she stops at a chestnut that has horseshoes nailed to it and stops to touch them and is thinking back about these people who have invested so much of their spirituality and hope into the literal wood, into this tree, just like the elm that's there at Howard's End. And remember that how Henry's always telling her too, like, you don't want to live here. It's damp, like it's cold, like the weather. Nature is against you. That's all very interesting.
So see, I feel like that's all of them missing the point. That Ruth understood the point. And it's funny,
the point is
because
what exactly?
That you need, I mean, I think that ultimately what Forrester's saying all of the time is you need balance. Is that balance is where things happen. And so I think that what's happening is that the people of commerce, like Wilcox, or the people of philosophy and books and learning, and again, things from other countries. I mean, we haven't even discussed the fact that the Schlegels are half German.
Yes.
That all of these people are missing the point, and that Ruth was the person who was attached to the earth and the mythology.
Yeah.
And that Margaret can't see that because she always lived in the city.
I like that very much. I like that idea.
Can I do a quote about Howard's End?
Yes.
So this is near the end. I mean, I think this does answer it. Again, it's not saying that Ruth is perfect. I mean, Ruth, like you said, she is of a different age. She's not for women having the vote. She's not for women having, she's not perfect either. It's always about balance. It's about mingling things. So this is what they say at the end. I love that Miss Avery has unpacked their things and just refuses to recognize on any level that isn't what she was supposed to do, because it's what she was supposed to do. I think that for them, for the story, for the place they needed to be, it was what Miss Avery was supposed to do. Yeah. It was supposed to become their house. It was supposed to be their house because that's what Ruth wanted. Ruth wanted to bring Margaret
back to that priestess fairy. Oh, I love that.
Ruth wanted Margaret to have this synthesis. She wanted to bring her to Howard's End, to bring the modern woman back to the earth. that's what she wanted. So Miss Avery was only enacting, again, just like they thought Miss Avery, how the Wilcoxes wrote Miss Avery off as crazy, they wrote Ruth off as not being able to make decisions at the end of her life, when in fact she possibly made a greater connection with Margaret in that short period than she had with anyone in her own family. Margaret was the person to inherit Howard's End because spiritually she was the person who was supposed to inherit it. So it says here, wait, give me a second. Sorry, I'm going to skip over all of the quotes I have about Miss Avery saying, no, really, you live here.
Which is so darling.
Yes. I just love it because she's just like, no, you live here. Really, you do. You're Mrs. Wilcox. Mrs. Wilcox lives here.
That's how. It's fantastic.
Yes. Okay. So when the two sisters are talking, when Margaret finds out about Helen being pregnant, which again, like, you know, we can get into all of that. Like the next generation is already set. Like we just.
That just blew my mind. Yes. Whoa.
Right. And remember, Miss Avery had set up a nursery.
Oh,
she didn't just unpack their stuff. She had set up a nursery.
She sure had. And Margaret wants children, did. Which I love.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
Very good.
Right. Yeah.
Very
we can
good.
let's also like put on hold the idea that the two sisters are kind of one person when you combine them, and that one doesn't want to have children and the other one has a child. Like we end up with a world where basically Henry Wilcox is living with the two sisters. So there's a synthesis that happens there as well, that the two sisters are almost like two halves of the same of a person. But let's not go there yet.
Okay.
Let's not go there yet.
Okay.
First of all, Helen had said this feels like a dead house, but when the sisters actually reconnect, she says, now this hasn't the feel of a dead house. The hall seems more alive even than in the old days when it held the Wilcoxes' own things. And they had been talking about how their things seemed to all
suited
fit,
the house. Yeah.
that they all fit, and that their possessions almost had a new life, a better life themselves.
I love that thing about the chairs being in the sunlight for the first time in years.
Exactly. So then it says, and all the time their salvation was lying round them, the past sanctifying the present with wild heartthrob declaring that there would after all be a future, with laughter and the voices of children. Helen, still smiling, came up to her sister. She said, "It is always, Meg." They looked into each other's eyes. The inner life had paid. And there's just this sense that this was what was always meant to be. And that's what I feel like. I mean, there are so many correct criticisms of his depiction of women. And yet at the same time, I mean, obviously this is a book about women, but this is a book that I do think ultimately is about women becoming their truest selves, and not in a gendered way. I mean, in a like self-actualization way.
Yes,
like not according to some gendered box, but according to a more universal sense of humanhood, of like that the combining. I mean, and even the commerce-oriented outlook of Henry isn't completely discarded, because it does influence Margaret. Margaret becomes
nothing is completely discarded, right. And that was my favorite takeaway from the book, is that we have all these people who see the world so differently, who are in such different spaces, whether it be gender or class or just their worldviews. But my favorite bit, what I considered the theme, I suppose.
The thesis statement?
Thesis statement. Here is another quote. "Don't you see that all this leads to comfort in the end? It is part of the battle against sameness. Differences, eternal differences, planted by God in a single family, so that there may always be color. Sorrow, perhaps, but color in the daily gray." I like that very much. Like the more people you meet, the more people who think differently than you, the more cultures you encounter, the more places you visit, the more people who you make that real connection with, the more you see the world in color, the more you see the world as it is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that ties, I mean, when Margaret was talking about the poetry and prose in the beginning, she used the word rainbow. That's right.
There's a lot of talk about gray, about mist, and about rainbow. Oh, wow, that's lovely. About color instead. I love that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do too. And I love that they brought Henry into the fold. The last time we see Miss Avery, it says, Miss Avery crossed the lawn and merged into the hedge that divided it from the farm.
She is a little bit of fairy, isn't she?
Wait, listen, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
It's so good. An old gap, which Mr. Wilcox had filled up, had reappeared, and her track through the dew followed the path that he had turfed over when he improved the garden and made it possible for games.
Wow.
So he had tried to tame nature. He had tried to tame the earth, which is, again, all about this like tearing down and rebuilding and the rejection of old house. Like he wanted to build them a new house when they had this wonderful house where Margaret was always meant to go.
Yes, that she always wanted to go. He's so dismissive of her.
Right. He was.
I'm afraid I don't like him.
I don't like him either. Yeah. I don't like him either. I mean, that's one thing. I don't want to bring up the movie too much. One thing where I do think that actually that Anthony Hopkins does manage to humanize him.
See, and I that's one of the reasons that I just love actors and theater and drama so much, is that sometimes you need this person to have skin on.
Right.
Like it really does help you.
The right person can do that, can take a character that on the page feels quite awful and give them, again, we're never really in his POV very much. So we don't get that from the book. He's more of a symbol than a man. I'm okay with that, because usually that's the women in a story. In this case, it's usually the men. It's more the men.
Oh my God, good call. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
But it is one thing I do appreciate about that adaptation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Matthew McFadden am I pronouncing his name right?
I believe that's how it's pronounced. I believe that's right. I hope so.
As much as I don't love that Pride and Prejudice, don't hate me, everyone. I don't love his
enjoy
Pride
it. It is very different.
We will get to that.
I enjoy it. That's great adaptations.
We will definitely have that conversation, because we have to start with Austen soon. But I really like him, and I'm really looking forward to his version of Henry.
Me too. That'll be interesting. I do need something to connect me to this character, because I dislike him.
Well, again, I think that what his place in the book is a way to, he exists to teach Margaret things. He exists like, there, like you said, like the many types of people, like, she needed a connection to nature and the earth beyond, her fantasizing about it. Wait, I have to read that train quote. It just,
please do.
It just kills me, because it is. It's like, she says, she's talking about the train station. She says, various railway termini, they are our gates to the glorious and the unknown. Through them we pass out into adventure and sunshine. To them, alas, we return. It's just it's such a romanticism. It's not, I mean, again, I get that. I love, like, I'm about to go on an airplane, and I love going on airplanes because they take me places. I totally get it. But again, after having seen Ruth, and again, in that first image that Helen, in that first letter, where it's like, all of the rest of the Wilcoxes are like, I will do exercises, I will do activities. And then you have Ruth, who's just being there. She's just in her place. She never talks about what one does at Howard's End. She just talks about what is there.
Yeah. I like that very much.
So I think that Henry exists because God knows those girls could certainly use a bit of practicality in their theorizing about the
he's
world.
He's a bit of a wet blanket sometimes.
At the very least, that's very charitable.
Yeah. But he does offer a differing perspective, and I love that they can't combat it most of the time. They're like, well, they could see that he had a point, and he always does. Like he always does have a point. Whether you agree with him or not, he always has a point.
Right.
Which is lovely. Again, the more perspectives you can get, at least the better your argument becomes, once you see the other points against it.
Right, exactly. I mean, I feel like he serves a good purpose. And I think that it's good to have, in contrast to Henry, to have his children who have taken, his outlook to such an extreme that it becomes just petulance and laziness.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So if you look, I mean, Paul, okay, he's, I don't know.
We don't get very much of Paul.
We don't get very much of Paul, though. He's like, he really annoys me at the end when he's so not being nice to Margaret.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charles is just god awful. I mean, he's horrible. He's just horrible from start to end. And so I think that
he is horrible. God,
but I think
he's a bastard.
He serves Henry's story to some level. It's just like, I mean, in different ways. I mean, it is also a criticism of Henry because it's like, this is what happens. Like when you are that person, but Henry does have some amount of an ethical core to him. But Charles is basically, if you have Henry, one more step removed from an ethical core, or from, at least having good taste in women. Mm-hmm. Henry, I mean, he does get points for honoring, for choosing both Ruth and Margaret. He gets some points, no?
Okay.
No, we're not giving him any points.
No, I'm just thinking about that. Do you get... No, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's going to be probably a very personal response to that. But
yeah,
no,
sure.
You don't get
sure. Fair enough. Okay.
No points.
He gets points in relation to Charles.
Yes.
When compared with Charles.
When compared with Charles, everybody gets points.
Well, again, I mean, Charles becomes the super dogmatic version of Henry. Like, Henry can make an argument for his case, and it does have some basis in things that we can respect, whereas Charles just is the mouthpiece of the same
and blunt
thing.
Force, I was thinking. Yeah, like you would never see Henry chasing down with a stick or a sword, or
absolutely.
In that way that Charles did.
Although, I mean, again, the idea stems from him because he's is willing to try to make the quote unquote seducer marry Helen.
That is true,
right? So, but he comes from that world. He comes from that sort of patriarchal outlook. Mm-hmm. So again, that's quite a bit of change. Like the fact that at the end he is living with the sisters, that he does bequeath the house to Margaret. These are things, and then to, her nephew who is, he's handing his first wife's house over basically to a fatherless child. Mm-hmm. So that's, a little bit of credit. I don't know. I feel like I can't believe I'm arguing. I can't believe I'm arguing Henry's case here.
He grows as a character, I guess, but I would have liked the version of events where Helen and Margaret go to Germany with Monica.
I know, right? Aren't
Monica,
you so curious?
I don't remember.
So curious about her.
Right? I want to know more. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the women possible homoerotic subtext of things.
I thought there certainly was.
Oh,
right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I feel like there definitely is. I feel like the connection between Ruth and Margaret is so weird because on some levels,
I was thinking Ruth and Margaret.
Okay. Oh, no. For me, I've always seen it with Ruth and Margaret. And so it's so complex because it's like essentially Ruth didn't choose Margaret for her husband, but she kind of did. And she ends up being the reason that they end up, basically they end up interacting because Henry's so uncomfortable about not actually having given the house to Margaret. And
that's true. Interesting.
But yes, I do see that. And then there's the question of what was the living arrangement that Helen was having in Germany with that kind of feminist? I forget how Margaret says it, but like,
I don't know. This Anglo-Italian, yes, that sort.
That sort of feminist.
Yes,
So yeah, it's just a little tidbits. I don't know, I just, it definitely had that feeling for me. Maybe I'm just inclined to see that. I don't know.
No, I thought it too. I didn't see it with Ruth and Margaret, but I did see it with Helen and Monica or Monique, which now I don't remember.
I've always seen it with Ruth and Margaret because how quickly their connection forms. And again, this could be that elemental thing that I was saying before. It could be just loneliness, that Ruth was very lonely and Margaret was very lonely. But I don't know. I've always felt like there's something to it. There's something more excited about it than.
That's interesting. I mean, you can see whatever you want to see. Like
I'm not saying that they had that kind of relationship. I just feel it always had that feeling to me of like friends that are like a little bit more excited than people who are just friends and meet.
Sure.
It is what it is. I have no idea.
Are you blushing again, Daphne?
I am not blushing. I'm looking at my notes.
Okay, so I want to talk about Helen's idea that death destroys a man, but the idea of death saves him, which is something that sticks with Leonard. That word or that phrase is in the novel twice. She's talking about money.
Right.
And about how, because Leonard is telling her, I see now that money is everything. That's what it really all comes down to, that you can't have beauty and art without it, that you can't have food and sustenance or even shelter without it, that it really all comes down to money. And she says, well, no, money is the great mask of that, of those things, basically. And she's talking about how she thinks that death is beautiful, and not morbidly, but death is beautiful because it reminds us that money is so mundane,
right?
That these great experiences of life are what we can't take with us. Like, we get the one go round, and we should experience everything to its fullest. But I love that argument that I have certainly found true in my life, that if you don't have money, you don't get those experiences. So there's got to be some kind of, again, that middle ground that I think that Forster wants us to see, that balance, as you called it.
That's so interesting. I mean, I feel like she changes her mind all the time about what money means.
That's because she hasn't the first clue, because she's always had it.
Right.
And she's never earned it.
You're
it's
so
just
right.
There.
Well, and she says that at some point. Like, I have a quote written down somewhere where she's talking to her aunt, and she's saying basically, like, we don't see, like, money is an island, I think she said, and we don't even see it because we've been standing on it, so we don't even see.
No, she's aware of that, but she's still, like, she just has no concept. She has no concept. She's going to give half of her earnings to Leonard. What was it, 5,000?
Oh, right. It's Helen who says that. It's Margaret who says the island thing. So, like, Helen really... No, and that makes sense, because Helen is the more practical one than Helen, right?
Margaret is the more practical one than
Margaret
Helen.
is the more practical one than Helen. Helen's just... Oh, she's a sweetheart, but she is not practical.
She is not practical, and she doesn't see clearly. That's why all this destruction comes in her wake.
Yeah.
She means well, but good intentions, when you have just no practical perspective.
Right. No understanding of the world.
No understanding, yes. Like, you can't... I read too once that people who win the lottery are often completely bankrupt in, like, 10 years or something? It's something very quick. It doesn't take long.
Yes. I mean, I think there are other factors. We don't need to get into that, but there are other factors about, like, people who come knocking at their door and stuff like that. Like, it's a very, well, actually, it's not unrelated. This idea that you have money, you don't actually deserve it. Like, that you
deserve
didn't earn
or
it.
Earn. Like, if you don't see where it comes from. I see this with my kids, God, all the time. Money, they do think it grows on trees. Like, they have just no idea, no accountability. And hey, buy me this thing that I'm then just going to, like, break the next day or spill something on the next day. And there's just, like, no I'm sorry, I feel like that makes it sound as though I am very much in the lower class. Let me be the first to just say this. Like, I am on food stamps now, so I know from whence I speak, but it gets you in the spot that I am in right now. Like, I can stay in this job that I've got now. I can stay working these couple of part-time jobs. I don't have health benefits unless I get pregnant, of course, but my kids do, and we get the food subsidy. If I get a better job, my income goes down.
Right.
That's a problem.
Right. I know. I mean, I was very. Are we going down that road? Are we going to talk about?
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Have you met me, Daphne?
I meant to ask
oversharing on the internet.
I meant to ask that beforehand. No, I was very aware of that going into this conversation with this book, with the two of us. Like, this is now more than a lot of our listeners know about the two of us, is that I grew up very, very comfortably middle class. And you did not. And we live in very different economic realities as we speak.
Yeah.
Very much like I even like had a conversation with one of our listeners who's become a friend about this. Like, when I started reading it, I was like, damn, but this is like, feels like it's super judging my college self, which is funny because that's when I read it. I don't even know if I saw
and
that.
You didn't even see it.
I probably
that's
didn't.
Adorable.
That's what's so hilarious. Is like I don't remember coming out of reading that book when I was in college, and when I was like, when I was very much a Helen, likely. Where
of course you were a Helen.
I was
Daphne,
totally a Helen.
Yeah.
I was totally a Helen. I mean, I didn't have that kind of money to like. I was
sure.
I didn't have like inheritance that I could. Right. I didn't have inheritance that I could live on and not do anything but read books. But I very much came from that perspective, and I think what's hilarious is that when I was in college, I don't think I even remotely saw this book as some sort of commentary on probably the very place I was about stuff, you know? And so that's really, I was very aware of us going into this book, like going into this discussion of this book, like of how this is an everyday real thing that still exists.
Yeah.
You know, 100 years later, this is not less relevant.
Mm-hmm.
The gender stuff is different. Not as different as I would like it to be, but it is different. We at least get to vote.
Yes, which is lovely. I'm going to read this little bit that Leonard Bast says, which really took my breath away and made me realize how much E.M. Forster did understand about not having money. I don't know if he ever didn't have money.
I don't think he ever didn't have money.
Well, he understood this part. He must have talked to somebody. I don't know what happened. He must have gotten a perspective. But so Leonard Bast's umbrella goes missing. Helen has taken it. She just takes umbrellas.
Right. And
this is just a part of her little...
jokes about it.
And jokes about it because it's an umbrella. It's, you know,
for
her, it's nothing. It's a throwaway thing. It's like when you drop a quarter in the street, you don't go back for it, right? I go back for quarters. Anyway... so he's missing his umbrella. He says, behind Monet and Debussy, the umbrella persisted with the steady beat of a drum. I suppose my umbrella will be all right, he was thinking. I don't really mind about it. I will think about music instead. I suppose my umbrella will be all right. Early in the afternoon, he had worried about seats. Ought he to have paid as much as 2 shillings? Earlier still, he had wondered, shall I try to do without a program? There had always been something to worry him, ever since he could remember, always something that distracted him in the pursuit of beauty. For he did pursue beauty, and therefore Margaret's speeches did flutter away from him like birds.
Yep.
That's a really, really good paragraph.
That's a really good paragraph. And also, when he comes to the house and she makes this whole big deal about how she pulls out this umbrella and says, oh, it's so ratty. It must be mine because I'm always the one with the ratty umbrellas. And for her, that just means she's just expressing how how interesting and eclectic she is, and how much she
Yeah.
doesn't really think about stuff like that. Like she's
No.
saying,
Oh,
she's
God.
saying when pointing out the umbrella, or the ratty umbrella, she's trying to show how she's not materialistic, which again is a place of privilege, that
Yes.
she can say, I have a ratty umbrella because I don't really care about these things.
Right.
But it turns out it's actually his umbrella.
And it's ratty because he cannot afford another umbrella, or he wouldn't have come to call. He would have just gone to the store
Exactly.
and gotten another umbrella.
And he feels shame about it. And he feels
He
shame
does.
about having a ratty umbrella because he wants to present himself according to how he sees their values. Oh, yeah. No, again, Ian Forster never wanted for money. He also was never a woman. He's very good at representing people
Entering into that space.
of different classes of whatever sort from himself.
That's very good.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's again, there's stuff I don't love, but there's so much in there that is so beautiful on that level.
Yeah. What are you giggling about? What has happened?
Just laughing at my young Helen self.
Oh, sure.
I can judge her and have compassion for her at the same time.
No, I get it.
Yeah, this is an interesting book. It's not always an easy book.
No, it's not.
Okay, we haven't even talked about Jackie yet.
I don't know how to talk about Jackie.
Jackie's hard to talk about, huh?
Yes, Jackie is hard to talk about. She is this version of the working class that does not seem to have that same ardor for more.
Right.
She has been, what is that word? I don't think that she can see herself anywhere else. She's always asking these men. She's always asking Leonard and Henry even.
Yep. Do you love me?
But you love me? Do you love me?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that Jackie's a hard character for me as well. I mean, I think that I don't know if she exists for herself in the story. I don't think she does. I mean, we don't get enough of her story to have anything but the feelings that the Schlegels have towards Leonard, we have towards Jackie. And Leonard has towards Jackie. I mean, that's the other thing, is that Leonard
Daphne.
is actually, sorry.
No,
Leonard,
that's okay. That's well earned. Oof.
Leonard is patronizing of
Yeah.
Jackie the same way that Helen is of Leonard.
Shit.
I'm sorry.
Yes. No, it's okay. No, I've been very guilty of this several times in my life. So here we are. Yeah.
It is. She is his shame, Henry's shame. She's our shame. I mean, I feel like she is not given interiority or a real well-rounded story intentionally, because I think that, and the way Helen talks about her makes me want to shake her. Is that Helen values Leonard because she sees Leonard aspiring to be like Helen. But she can't see that in Jackie for that very reason. Because Jackie is existing in that realm and not aspiring to a life of the mind and a life of art and beauty. So she isn't really worthy of Helen's regard. Or patronage.
Yeah, of her patronage. I was going to say, I think that she despises Henry for the same reasons, and Henry is of a higher class. So I don't know if that's as fair.
Oh, that's interesting. That Jackie and Henry both exist just in the very right in front of your face world. That they're not of intellectualism and searching and art and beauty.
Right.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel. That Jackie and Henry are of the same type of person, but you get to see how gender and wealth take the same kind of person and and put them in such different places.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. But it's so difficult for me, the scenes with her and Leonard, because we're meant to, on some level, or we would in another story, honor his choices because he's being loyal and he's taking care of her, but he basically despises her.
Yes.
And
in the beginning
is horrifying.
I like how in the end he becomes more sentimental towards her. Like he
does.
He tends to have like more.
Yeah.
He has more real affection.
Well, maybe because he had the experience of having someone that he aspires to be like patronize him. So it made him more, or not patronize, be patronizing of him. So that maybe gave him some level of humility and understanding of Jackie's experience.
Leonard does have a lot of true humility that I really like. I love that.
He also has a lot of pride.
Yes.
In relation to Jackie. Like, I see that in relation to Jackie. He sees himself as better than Jackie.
Yes. Well, again, but the humility comes.
Yes.
There at the end. Yes. I love when he has the guilt, although the guilt comes from that, the bad side of humility, I suppose, where he feels like he has somehow ruined a great work of art. He says, like, torn a picture from its frame when he's thinking about Helen, which is really not fair because, again, he is just idolizing her.
He's just idolizing her.
He really is. But I love that idea that he felt rent in two and would have these arguments and dialogues as though he were two persons. Like, how could you brute? Which is something that you would never, Henry didn't do anything like that.
No, Henry didn't do that. I mean, it is still based in patriarchal ideas because
yes, still the whole Madonna whore thing again.
Right. It's still like, it's not that different than the idea that Henry and Charles have of him being the seducer.
Yes.
When in fact, Helen was the person in a greater position of power than him. And she understands that.
She certainly does. Yes.
Right. Yes. I think that's one thing where Margaret and Helen are very clear for the most part, is that they and, part of their intellectualism, possibly, I feel like it suggested part of their foreignness is that they are very secure in themselves as beings with agency. They don't, again, like we discussed, they don't necessarily get all of their privilege. They don't understand all of that, but they do understand themselves as beings with agency.
Yes, that is true.
Right. Like, even when Henry is being totally awful, Margaret is saying, well, whatever, if I was younger, if I was this, if I was that, I would be more bothered by this. Although on the flip side, that's also her buying into this idea of being, the exceptional female.
Ooh, there's a big one. Yes.
I think I brought that up at the beginning, but yeah, that is something that exists in this book, this idea that they are exceptional females, and so we're supposed to honor them more because they
rise above their gender.
Exactly. Yep. That's one of my least favorite things.
Yeah, no, that's terrible.
Well, and again, that has to do with Helen's scorn of
That'll
Jackie.
Be interesting to talk about when we talk about Austen.
Yes, it will.
Yes. Put a pin in that. Yeah.
That'll be interesting to talk about someday when we talk about Atwood.
Oh, yes. Okay. Very good.
Someday, listeners. That's not soon. Yeah, I just feel like I'm always battling with the idea of the exceptional woman. And yes, this book definitely. I feel like I've said a million things about what this book is doing with gender. It is doing a million things with gender, but yes, one of the things I like less is that we are contrasting these two women as exceptional, and part of what makes them exceptional is actually how they have crossed the boundary into things that are considered the realm of men.
Yes, certainly.
I I have very mixed feelings about that
it
here.
feels like when they're described, and Margaret especially, when Margaret is described as unfeminine,
right?
It is both with like this off-putting,
right,
you shouldn't be like this, but also with and that's what makes you such an exceptional woman. You're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to escape that in period stories. I mean,
yes,
because so little was expected of women.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're just kind of always existing in that reality. I mean, we exist in that reality. This is still an issue in story. This is still an issue.
No, I know. Yeah, it's still a big deal that we're doing this podcast even. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's hard because it's so easy to celebrate that type of character. And it's also dangerous. Like it's very hard, and it's
dangerous as women too, to
absolutely
want to align ourselves with the exceptional woman on the backs of other women.
Right. Well, and that's where it's a problem. So this is where it's a problem, and I feel like this book is giving us both things, because we have the example of Margaret, or maybe that's a division between Margaret and Helen to some extent, that we have Margaret who, when she shows that side of herself at the tea, when she invites Ruth to the tea, and then she immediately realizes that was showing a lack of grace, that she understood that Ruth is not less exceptional, even though she's not exceptional in the same ways. And so that's a sign that Margaret possibly is a woman who has a larger perspective about the varieties of expressions of femininity than what Helen has. Whereas Margaret is never disdainful of Jackie. That is always coming from Helen. She
immediately blames men.
Right. It is completely coming from Helen.
Sure.
And so
Helen is just completely dismissive of Jackie.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's quite horrible. There are moments where it's really distressing.
Yeah.
And it's possible that to some extent Leonard is attracted to that, because she does it to Leonard.
Yeah.
And it's tapping into feelings he already had about Jackie, and that's
her inferiority.
And how problematic is that for a woman with that kind of learning to like bond with a man because of his scorn for not his wife, but whatever, his partner. Mm-hmm. God, it was very, very troubling to me, those moments in the book. And they should be. I mean, I think that was the point.
That is the point. Yes.
And I think it's interesting that Margaret, when she does cross over into that, she immediately backtracks. And maybe that is the influence of Ruth. I mean, that's going back to this idea that Margaret needed Ruth and needed this connection with the earth to become this greater person that she becomes, this person who can encompass all of them. That perhaps meeting Ruth was a really instructive experience for Margaret. That she suddenly was able to look at herself from outside of herself, and to see herself through Ruth's eyes was a really helpful thing for Margaret to become a better version of herself.
I do like that very much.
I do too. I really love, I want like a million more chapters of Ruth and Margaret together.
Yes.
I really do.
I hate that we lost Ruth so quickly. She's such a wonderful character.
I know. But I mean, I think we needed to lose Ruth for the story, because I think that Margaret needed to some extent not become Ruth, but become a synthesis of the life she had led before Ruth and the person she was meant to be. I mean, I would be totally okay with the alternate reality where like they just don't even bother with Henry, and like
right,
where
yes,
Ruth and Margaret go live in Howard's End. Like, that's a fine story too. It's a different story. That'd be a very happy story and not as interesting a story. That would be
not as interesting. True.
No.
Yep.
That would be a lovely story that would have way fewer facets to it. The women of Howard's End, and no men.
I love that. Hestia's End. Yes.
And Miss Avery can like go through the hedges that were never bothered because no man ever tried to cover it up.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we've done this book justice.
We have.
I cannot wait to talk about the adaptation. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to, as much as I enjoyed the movie, I'm really looking forward to 4 hours of adaptation of this book.
Yes, maybe a little bit more interiority. That'll be wonderful.
Yeah, I just this whole trend towards these limited series. I mean, I know the BBC. This started with the BBC. This didn't start with Stars, even though American television is doing this more and more. BBC has always been doing this, but I'm so loving this trend of taking books and making them into limited series. It's just, it's fabulous. It's really wonderful.
Well, let me ask you, Daphne, before we wrap up, what was your favorite part?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know if I have a favorite part. Okay, Ruth. Ruth is my favorite part. Can I just say Ruth? Like everything about Ruth.
You can absolutely say Ruth. Yeah.
Ruth is my favorite part.
Ruth is wonderful. I think that's great.
Or Miss Avery. Like Miss Avery and the house.
Julia Ormond, and I love her.
I know. It's very exciting. Miss Avery also. Ruth and Miss Avery. But I love... Okay. No, actually, I'm going to say Miss Avery. I love Miss Avery's, like, whole thing with just like, I'm going to unpack all this stuff. And the sword, I didn't ever get into that. I love the symbolism of the sword. Like, that the sword was unsheathed, that the sword is their father's, we didn't even talk about their father and how he's this, like, living image for them of, like, he's kind of the moral ideal for them. That he was the one who made this move. He's a person who went against comfort, that he made this move to England, and that he was their moral center. Like, they always, when they're trying to find their morality, they go back to their father.
Yes.
So the idea...
I love it when they talk about paying the rent being when you give somebody the benefit of the doubt and they hurt you.
Right.
Well, you're paying the rent from believing in the best of mankind.
Right. That was the thing. The idea that, what was it, like, that Margaret says, I would rather believe, that to believe the best in people is something great, and to be prepared for the worst is like of the devil. And that was her father's.
And that's what her father said.
Love that. Mm-hmm. So the idea that not only is the sword there, but that the sword is unsheathed feels like that there's some, like, essential part of their father had been. I mean, okay, it's kind of phallic too. Okay, now I'm thinking about Zach McGowan showing us his sword. Okay, I need to not go there.
When are you not thinking about Zach McGowan showing us his sword? I start every morning thinking about Zach McGowan showing us his sword.
I don't, but I love that you do. So okay, we don't need to go down the phallic road, but the idea that in addition to setting up all the furniture and setting up the nursery, that Miss Avery had actually, like, that she had displayed the sword in a different way than that they had ever seen it before, and that they both remarked on that separately. They both sisters remarked on that about how interesting it was that the sword was displayed without its sheath. And so it just felt to me like somehow Miss Avery not only had this bizarre premonition that they should be living there and that they would be living there and that they needed a nursery, but that she even revealed to them, like the chairs in the sunlight, like the sword, that Miss Avery, by having them inhabit Howard's End through their belongings, she was showing them sides of themselves that they hadn't seen before. I love that. I could go on about that for much longer.
Yeah,
I think I'll stop there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
so, it's wonderful.
So tell me your favorite part.
Okay, I love everything about the actual space of Howard's End, but I really liked. We talked about those times when you get, like, the narrative voice, and he just gets a little bit philosophical on you. I thought those were beautiful, actually. So here he is talking about love. Says, love cannot comprehend another's infinity. He is conscious only of his own. Flying sunbeam, falling rose, pebble that asks for one quiet plunge below the fretting interplay of space and time. He knows that he will survive at the end of things, and be gathered by fate as a jewel from the slime, and be handed with admiration round the assembly of the gods. Men did produce this, they will say, and saying, they will give men immortality.
Damn.
That's just gorgeous. That's
just gorgeous.
Beautiful prose. That's just
Wow.
amazing. Like that alone could be a plaque somewhere on my wall. I like that very much.
That's very beautiful.
So that was my favorite bit of prose.
Oh, man. I kind of feel like we have to do Howard's End. I mean, not Howard's End. I feel like we have to do a Room with a View at some point, too.
At some point.
Okay.
We can do this forever.
Okay. I really want to do that one, too.
Yeah,
I personally really want to revisit it because I have seen the movie since the first time I saw the movie. I have seen both of these movies many times. I have not read the book, though, again, since the early 90s. So I'm very curious how the book will read to me now.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's a simpler story. It's a much simpler story.
I think that's probably okay. My main criticism for this book is that it should have been shorter.
Right.
It drags in the middle.
It might be doing too many things. Yeah.
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 No, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's do a Room with a View at some point. I think that would be interesting, especially now that we kind of have a sense for his language and stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, but on practical level, it's going to be 3 weeks before we do our next episode because
you're going on vacation.
Because I'm going on vacation. That's
I'm
one
so
of the
pleased for you.
reasons. Thank you. Partly because I'm going on vacation, also partly because the limited series is starting on Starz on April 8th, 2 days after my birthday, 1 day after Elizabeth's birthday. Because we
right.
almost have the same birthday. And
my star sister.
And yes, absolutely. And I would like to, we have decided we want to talk about 2 episodes and then 2 episodes. We're going to do two podcasts about the limited series. So the next one will be, our next episode will be on, will drop on April 16th because then we will have had 2 episodes air in the U.S.
Perfect.
Yes, people in other countries may have already seen this limited series, but people in the U.S. have not. So you know, that Starz subscription that we assume you already have because because of Black Sails, if not for other reasons. Also Outlander. Really, come on, everyone must have Starz. Then you can watch limited series. The first episode will be on the 8th, and the second one on the 15th. And then
also, have you seen the previews for the new Sweet Bitter?
No.
Please look at that. That's
Okay.
gonna be my next just like feel good show, I think. I could
Awesome.
be wrong. Look at that.
Okay,
It
I
looks
totally will. I have
lovely.
not at all looked at that. Because pirates? Because I always just go straight
I
to
get it.
pirates.
It's totally different. This is a totally different scene.
So we will see you again on April 16th, and we will be talking about the first 2 episodes, the series Howard's End, and we can't wait.
Yep. Yes. Well, this has been lovely, Daphne, as always.
Yes, it has. And also leave us reviews. I didn't check if we have ones to read, and we haven't read them in a while.
Either. Yeah,
yes,
no,
we did
reviews
not
on
check.
iTunes are very important.
Yes,
Support on Patreon helps us so much. Support
Yes.
women in the world, everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
Please.
And yes, we will next time if we have new reviews, which we might already have and we didn't check, but if whatever, we will read 2 reviews next episode if we have new reviews to read.
Reviews on iTunes and support at patreon.com/Common Room Radio.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye. Can I Just Say podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter @JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.